And.
Hello, Mayor. Hi. Nice to see you, sir. Remember my name? Of course. Mayor, too.
How are you? We've met before. As you see, the director of public utilities.
Yeah, awesome. Good to see you guys. Beautiful, man. No kidding. Yeah, we post that too. Yeah, we have a group of that. It's pretty nice. I see that. Looks like a great corner. I'm saying, man, it's red, it's orange, yellow, South America.
So my dad went up and
Had a couple accidents and look out of the road.
super funny site.
I've had a number of near accidents.
Right.
One of the accidents I had was where I was going down to this girl's house that I was that I'm going out with. And I had a spot of soup that I made at the shelter. And I'm going down Race Car Corner, going way too fast. I didn't believe it was good. Sort of mid-afternoon, late afternoon. And all of a sudden the soup just starts sliding off. I reach over to grab it and I'm like, an axle, off into the axle. Well, I mean,
So I imagine we'll start momentarily here.
Smell any water flow, this big gigantic hole in the side of it.
I
Might have to move it. Literally, this hole in the side of the mountain. Yeah. Let's see, so there's Maren and Polly and.
And I'm
There's
leaving. You're back in good hands. Cameron was going to be a minute late, so I just
Cameron's
want to
there.
make sure we had someone here. So I'll
We're
turn it
back.
over to Cameron. Nice to see you. Okay, hi, bye.
Oh, I see.
Mr. Moxon.
Jonathan, are we, do you know if we're waiting on Dave?
Dave is supposed to be here in person. He said he would be here in person, so I assumed he got double traffic lighted.
Well, John, if you just want to give me like a 10-second warning before you want to get started, I'll get everything going.
Okay.
We'll pull this over.
Yeah, go for it.
My calendar appointment didn't have the Zoom ID, so I went back to the 1 hour warning, but then I had to go through a bunch of different sign-ins. It was different.
I did realize I sent everyone the wrong type of login, but no, so
John, the webinars do not, I don't know that the webinars,
I signed up right up the wrong thing, like they were attendees.
my calendar appointment is just a standing placeholder that will always be separate from a specific login. You always get an email from Zoom an hour beforehand.
That's the one that I was having a lot of issues with, asking for all the sign passwords and accounts and all that stuff, but that's okay.
And that was my fault, and I apologize.
No.
So Paul, can I ask you, where should I log in then?
From the email you got from Zoom an hour ago.
Okay. Just trying to.
Down.
Get my update.
Correct, yes.
I can resend it too.
Military, submarine base.
Well, no, my inbox isn't.
I don't think so, I think it's, so down here, it's, west of Seattle,
And Molly won't-
Is that right?
We'll
I don't-
start
I don't-
5
I
after
don't
the-
know, submarine base that far north.
I think,
I'm resetting it here right now.
well, it's just that my inbox isn't updated, is the only thing, so I don't think it matters.
Okay, if you can't, don't worry about it.
It's the first sign you need to worry about when they cut you off the email.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yes.
I think it's an internet connection issue, but.
So
Do you wanna go ahead and
Dave,
get
Dave
started?
was gonna come up in person, but he's not there yet. That's what I understand.
Correct.
Okay, we do have enough to get started. Chris, are
Okay, let me get-
you really
Recording.
need to
going.
wait for you to log
1
in?
second.
Chris, are we good? Are you good?
I think if the recording is started, we're good to go.
Okay, let's do that. Well, welcome everybody. Sorry I couldn't make it up there today. Welcome to the September 24th Town of Alta Planning Commission. And I certainly wanted to take a drive up there, but that darn work gets in the way, but hope everybody's had the first couple of days of fall are nice. It's always energizing for me personally, and I'm like a squirrel out there gathering nuts. And and looking forward to ski season later on, so. With that, we have an agenda in the packet. Our last meeting, as you all know, was really focused on going through the minutes, refining, updating, et cetera, from the meeting before, from the July meeting, so we do have the updated, that's basically the minutes. And are there any, that is the minutes from last time, is basically the minutes from the time before. Any edits or suggestions? I think, did everything get recaptured well? Go ahead.
I just
Jeff.
had one comment that I forwarded to Molly earlier is that the paragraph where we corrected it to say 8,000 gallons per day.
Yes.
Dropped to 0. It was only
Oops.
800 gallons per day. So just need to add that 0 back in.
All right, on page 11.
Yeah. Other than that, I was good.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve then?
I'd make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Right, I heard a tie there. Let's go with Maren, thank you. Those in favor of approving the minutes from July, thumbs up.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
All right, great. All right, I'm not in the room, so I'm sorry if there's any public comment. I missed that one. Anybody? Any public there today wants to speak to the commission? Okay.
No.
All right, thank you. Well, let's talk about our item for the next couple of meetings. Item number 4, the Wildland Urban Interface Code and House Bill 48. Let's learn about the code and then maybe learn about what the consequences are in terms of House Bill 48 and how we reconcile that with our internal processes. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Chris, and then Chris, if you want to take it there and introduce and run with it, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the Planning Commission for getting together today. Let's see if I can set this up to view a little bit more cleanly on the screen here. Pretty guidance line
That's looking good
for.
at this end.
Yeah, it's, let's see, well, yeah, okay, so it'll advance with a quick arrow, okay. Thank y'all for joining. I do think Dave Abraham told me he was will be here in person today, so I do assume that we'll have him join us. Which is good, as Dave has some experience as an Alta resident and maybe quasi property manager up here at the Wildland Urban Interface. So I think everybody understands the purpose of the discussion here today is to talk about the requirement that towns under a recent act of the state legislature to amongst other things adopt the Wildland Urban Interface Code. So we have kind of a bare minimum requirement to do so. A key detail there that I think I left out of the presentation, and I think Chief Torgerson from UFA reminded me of this, is that we have to do that by, it's either December 31st or January 1st, probably. That may be immaterial. Well, probably isn't material in some contexts, but we'll do our best and hit the earlier date, and hopefully take both those days off from work anyways. But so we have to adopt the WUI code in a local WUI boundary by the end of the year. We ought to make some changes to town code, not to create conflicts with the WUI code. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this HB 48 and some of the other circumstances that we will find ourselves dealing with up here in the Wildland Urban Interface, and specifically that property owners in the WUI, as it's called, will be looking forward to. We do have Chief Jay Torgerson with Unified Fire Authority here. Jay is a battalion chief who has experience come across UFA's operational program. He's our municipal liaison. He has worked with Station 113 in the past, and so he's our liaison to the sort of larger bureaucracy of UFA and all manner of things. We work with the Fire Prevention Bureau, I think it's called, on all matters of fire code interpretation. So on a day-to-day basis, once we're applying the WUI code to development proposals, building out urban applications and the like, we work with essentially an area fire marshal or fire prevention specialist. So Jay can answer, is much more qualified to answer questions about the wildland fire and some of the specifics that are at play here with this some of these regulations that I am. Got
Yes, how are you?
Good already.
There are traffic lights? Two traffic lights.
Oh, yeah. Story of our lives.
It was off to the side, so
Oh.
he was there, but he didn't slow me down.
I got the cement and a stopping lights.
Yeah. Lucked out then, just two stoplights.
Dave, we only just introduced the agenda item here.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's no worries, I think you're in the loop. So the wildland urban interface, this definition straight from the 2006 Utah Wildland Urban Interface Code. It's the area where, human development meets or intermingles with undeveloped wildland or vegetative fuel. So obviously, places like the Salt Lake Valley where you've got dense urban development and open space, butting against each other. The wildland interface ecological areas. I think this is an interesting graphic. Not only that we're very nearby and it's straight from the state website, but you can see that, for instance, the stream channel for whether I don't know if that's Little Willow Creek that runs through Nippledale Park is determined to be wildland urban interface. So you see areas of wildland urban interface throughout the urban corridor. So that's an interesting detail there. Like I said, we are taking action, we're compelled to take action here under Utah House Bill 48 passed during this past legislative session. It sets up kind of a complex approach to mitigating or reducing wildfire risk on developed property and also keeping property insurers in the market and sort of operating above board. We talk about that a little bit later. So the Wildland Urban Interface Code has a number of sort of key effects. The one that's most relevant to our discussion today, because it's where the conflict with Town of Alta code comes up, is in its provision of defensible space for vegetation management requirements. I think we're all familiar with the concept of defensible space. Basically, it's if you have to treat the vegetation around your house to reduce the communicability of flames from a forest fire to your house and vice versa. Let's see, this is a fairly run-of-the-mill, this is not like a specific defensible space graphic from the WUI code. I think I just Google image search defensible space and pulled this one out. The point is that in most defensible space regimes, you've got different requirements that apply further away from a structure than what applies closer to the structure. So you can see, I guess one thing I'll point out on the sort of highlighted in the WUI code is that defensible space is not clear cutting. Doesn't require you to just raise all the vegetation within 100 feet of your house. You can have trees. You just have to create clearance between the crowns of the trees, electrical facilities, and so forth. And there are, depending on how far away you are from your house, requirements for what you do to kind of the understory or ladder fuels. So Town of Alta Code section 932 or 9, I believe it's chapter 9.3, preservation of vegetation during development. This is from our kind of building codes and construction regulations title in town code. So it's not this is not in the land use title, it's not title 10. But there is some land use policy implicit here. This is where our requirements or restrictions on vegetation removal or tree removal in particular are provided, and it's I don't know if draconian is the right word, it's pretty strict. You have to demonstrate extreme hardship to remove a mature tree. And then you have to get approval from either the mayor or the planning commission, depending on what kind of project you're doing for your vegetation site plan. And then it requires you to replace that vegetation. It may not be specific with where that occurs, but we can't require you to do anything off site from the property you own. So that's typically, I assume, where these requirements have been met in the past. And this is kind of the bulk of our town of Alta specific vegetation management ordinance language. And I think there's a range of approaches we could take to amending this, from kind of the bare minimum to, potentially like a full re-envisioning of our vegetation management ordinances. I don't know if we'll have time before the end of the year to get that all done. I think we'll see what everyone thinks about the policy itself. But we should at least create an exception for defensible space in that vegetation management ordinance. I'll just clarify again, this is not, defensible space is not clear cutting. So we can still have a restrictive or perhaps cautious vegetation or tree removal requirement, and many other jurisdictions do, especially in ski towns or communities that put a high value on kind of scenic or environmental quality. So yeah, I think we need to create an exception for defensible space work. I think we probably ought to reconsider who has authority to approve vegetation site plans. UFA will be approving vegetation site plans under the Wild and Urban Interface Code anyway. So we probably just want to make space for that in general. There are a number of alternative approaches we could take to changing the vegetation management ordinance. This is just one, and this is really only an excerpt of the town of Brighton's tree and vegetation protection ordinance. It's actually it's got like 5 or 6 times as much language in it. And I believe Cameron Platt, who doesn't typically join our planning commission meetings, who works with Bob Planninng to be our town attorney, is on the call. And he may or may not kind of have his fingerprints on this specific town of Brighton ordinance. But I excerpted the part that essentially just provides that really clean exception for defensible space work. So it sets up wildland hazards, wildfire hazards, or defensible space as one of those situations where you can remove trees. And I actually think that overall, if you take the full, the entirety of this tree and vegetation protection ordinance, it's a more sophisticated approach to vegetation management than ours that I think has a lot of interesting content for us to consider. Again, we might just not have time to do that. So we can work up draft language for a town of Alta ordinance amendment based on this, or really anything else. If we don't take action by the end of the year to adopt the recode and presumably a local wild and urban interface boundary, then it disturbs the agreement that we currently have with the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands for the state to cover the town's costs for, I think an initial attack is maybe not the right technical term, but usually the town's cost in fighting a wildland fire, responding to a wildland fire. And currently maintain a community wildfire preparedness plan or protection plan. Kind of UFA helps us with that. And that's how we meet. Since they created the CWPD program in Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, we've been in this arrangement where we can get sort of cost recovery if we bear the costs in a wildfire. And they're just sort of adding this to our side of the bargain with the state. On the local WUI boundary, Brighton and Immigration Canyon Township are the two examples of a municipal jurisdiction that's, you know, wholly within the kind of the Wasatch Mountains themselves that are nearby. They've both already adopted the WUI code, so they've both adopted wild and urban interface boundaries that take in the entire municipality. It's really interesting to look at some of the exposure mapping products out there and compare to Alta. I would say from a layman's perspective, we don't have as much bright red on the map as some of those communities. If anybody goes up Immigration Canyon, I'm sure you would agree it's a very different ecosystem and different development pattern than we have up here at 9,000 feet in, like, you know, the second snowiest place in the lower 48. But we still are very exposed to wildfire, and we have some unique factors in terms of our isolation. So we would recommend, we recommend, I think UFA is ready to join in the recommendation that staff would make to adopt the retired zone boundary. There are some ways we could, you know, kind of parse out some areas, but we'd have to essentially support that with data. And one great term that the UFA guys have provided to me recently is ember casting, which is where do the embers generated by a fire go? And they really kind of go all over the place, I think, right? I mean, it's a small place and there's a lot of vegetation and it's really, so yeah, that's our recommendation at this point. And just to be clear, that means that everybody would, all properties would be required to comply with the wild and urban interface code as they are in Big Cotton Canyon, essentially, in Immigration Canyon. Is unincorporated Salt Lake County, like, does the WUI code apply to Snowbird?
Yes.
You know? Yeah, so we're really kind of an outlier. So I'll talk a little bit more about HB 48 and some of the other components of that. I'll start with this distinction between the WUI boundary adoption that we have to do. So we will adopt our own WUI boundary. As I described, the state under HB 48 is responsible for designating a high risk wild and urban interface area. And this is like hyper data informed. You know, if you're not aware, wildland fire is a super technical and science-based discipline these days. And so the state takes quite a lot of data, kind of computing power into assessing high-risk WUI properties. So this is, I don't know if it's completely accurate to say that the high-risk WUI boundary, that the local WUI boundary is irrelevant to the high-risk WUI mapping. They're not entirely dependent on one another, I think. So, and maybe another way to look at it is that even if we were to slice out, for instance, base facilities on properties that are not like stuck in the middle of the forest, this function on the right, that states high risk WUI mapping, might find those properties to be high risk anyways.
Have you got a sense, are they gonna meet their October timeline commitment?
Well, do you know anything more about the state's process at this point?
I don't. I know that they're ramping things up quickly, but we're not involved in that process, and so we're not hearing how quickly they will have all of this available, and you know, the fees that they will assess the property owners. That's still a work in progress as well.
I don't know what other timelines there are in the statute other than the one that we're under. I think this October thing is sort of an offer from forestry, fire, and state lands. So yeah, so this is the current state risk assessment portal, and there are links all over this slide and really all throughout the slide deck if you're interested. This is a pretty cool tool. It's the Utah Wildfire Risk Assessment portal. And you can click on the map, or you can enter your address and get a risk assessment. So I've on the left is kind of the way the webpage looks, and then on the right is a zoom in, and I've entered the town office address there, and it turns out we're assessed a high risk, not a very high risk, but a high risk there at the town office. And I do believe that this tool is going to be updated and that some version of it is going to be essentially what the state uses, but I'm not certain of that. Kind of the big, and I don't know if it's fair to say controversial components of this HB 48 program is that, so we declare a movie boundary, we apply the movie code, the state assesses high risk properties, and then the Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands and or counties will assess properties that are within that high risk state designation as to their specific exposure on the site. And using some kind of formula that's based on the square footage of the structure, they will assess a fee that property owners will pay, and how that assessment exactly will be collected. I don't know if it's in tax notices or, you know, somebody showing up on the doorstep, probably taxes, I guess. Is it through tax notices?
Yeah, it will be,
Okay.
what I understand, it will be part of your tax and it will go to the county.
Uh-huh.
And then the county, some of that fee will stay with the county, some of it will go to the state.
Okay, well, yeah, so like I said, property owners that are, you know, found to be in a high risk property within the wildland urban interface pay a fee. Fees will vary, I think, based on classification level, but then also what property owners do to, you know, respond to the assessments essentially. And the funds are used to fund the assessments. Are they used for other forestry, fire, state lands purposes, or?
No, they've not specifically identified exactly how the funds will be used, but it will all be related to wildfire mitigation or wildfire risk reduction. Those sorts of programs, so it stays within, you know, the intent of the law.
Have you heard anything about? I feel like I've heard about the possibility that depending on how much funding this generates, it would create like grant programs that HOAs could apply for.
It may, they have not put anything out specifically on that though.
Yeah, kind of one of those unfunded state mandates. Right.
Think?
What's that?
I think.
Yeah, it's a specialty, so. So another side of that is, and I think a high level objective of HB 48 is, I think we're all aware that property insurance is harder and harder to get. It's more and more expensive in mountain communities with any sort of exposure profile to wildland fire hazard. And so there are provisions in the bill to. They don't strike me as all that strong, but they basically require insurers to be transparent about, you know, why they're dropping a policy, why they're raising rates. And then it does also require them to use the forestry, fire and state lands risk mapping tool to sort of, you know, base their whatever their policy on. So it constrains the insurance market to some extent. So this is a small piece of the puzzle. Wildland fire does not appear in the Town of Alta general plan or in the town code anywhere. There's been kind of a cultural assumption, I think, up here that we're less exposed than some other communities. I think there probably still some truth to that given our elevation and you know, how much it rains and snows and rains rather. But I think we all agree it's a matter of time before there's a major wildfire in Little Cotton Canyon. And, you know, Jay, I think we were talking about wildland fire hazard at some point over the years, and you used the term Swiss cheese theory of risk. And you know, how many holes in the stack of slices of Swiss cheese align. And so you have an undistinguished campfire at the mouth of the canyon when it hasn't rained for a month in August, and it's a windy day, and it's the first day of Oktoberfest, and the flames kick up, and you get a fire racing up the canyon, and there we are. So we, especially with the prevalence of catastrophic fire in the news around the West, really around the world, it's time for the town to take it more seriously and prepare. So this is a good first step. UFA is our fire department, but of course, we're like 80% federal land boundary, so any sort of significant wildfire would entail a multi-agency response, and it would be a really big deal. I mean, this is about as high value an environment as you could get to have a wildfire in. So it's reasonably safe to assume we have a lot of resources present in the canyon almost immediately. We do have we don't seem to suffer major wildfire along the Wasatch Front urban corridor all that often. There are graphics on here on the screen from the two that to my knowledge are most recent. That one at the top is the Parley's 137 fire from August of 2021, and I think that was maybe more along the lines of like 500 or 600 acres than 3,000. That's the pyrocumulus cloud from that Friday afternoon. I remember I was on the Mid Mountain Trail in Park City and sort of saw that pop up, and a few moments later there were some summer ski patrollers kind of ordering us to take a service road down to the canyons, and then driving down the canyon that afternoon. You know, it's just crazy to have 6 tankers and 5 helicopters overhead, and a raging wildfire. And then that one on the bottom is the huge fire that some of us might remember from 2018. I think it started as a lightning strike, and like a month later it was in a wilderness area, very remote wilderness area. A month later it grew into this really catastrophic wildfire that I don't believe it had all that much impact on property. I don't know if anybody was hurt or killed, but it was certainly a complicated, very complex incident that affected a huge land area. Small fires do occur routinely in and around Alta. We often get phone calls from either the Forest Service or from UFA about those, and it'll be like lightnings. There was a tree struck by lightning in Broads Fork, and probably not much of a reason to worry. I do recall a fire. I recall a fire in the like on a dead snag on Berman in the Hellgate Cliffs that people noticed from the cliff spa pool.
Yeah.
And it was like all over social media. And I don't remember what the circumstances around that were. It was a lightning strike, and if so, I was like,
Sure was a lightning strike, and it burned for several days, but it never really spread.
Yeah, we had something similar this summer at Milby South Fork. That we suspect was either lightning strike or it could have been human caused. But it was in an area that the Forest Service team was not, they were not, they didn't have any concerns that it was going to spread. So it was one of those where kept an eye on it, watched it, and let it burn. But it was several weeks that it would burn, which is not uncommon with fires like that. But a number of other fires that maybe weren't impactful could have been. We had a machine gun fire in the Harriman area probably 7 or 8 years ago that it did destroy a few homes, but it started in a wildland urban interface area, south wind behind it, and moved towards the town of Harriman. And obviously that's our concern here. When those Swiss cheese holes line up, you have things low humidity, wind, heat, drought for a couple of years. It would be a concern that you could have a fire up here that could spread.
So anyway, we don't have much choice in taking action on adopting the movie code and local movie boundary. So I don't think we need to discuss that to a significant extent, although we do need to present language adopting those things. I know Cameron has got that on the to-do list. And it certainly would be safest to narrow or amend in some fashion, whether that's narrow or more broadly, the that section 9.3 preservation of development in the town code. So we're running through through the planning commission. The WUI code, there's some argument it is maybe not a land use regulation, but the safest thing to do is assume that it is, and you guys are a great forum to talk through some of the policy implications of an amendment to the preservation and development of vegetation. Before it goes to the council. So. I would definitely check out these other resources. I pulled most of the material and, glean most of my understanding of the situation from these sources. That Division of Natural Resources Wildfire Perimeters map is really cool if you've never seen one of those. That it'll just, you can find that Pole Creek fire and all the other fires across the state of Utah in there and start to wonder, well, what's left. That's a little dour. So anyway, I don't know if you have any questions or comments on the way I've presented it.
Thanks, Chris. I got a quick question as far as enforcement, is there like an enforcement aspect, or maybe you mentioned this already, to double check the existing properties once adopted? How does that work?
Jay, do you have any thoughts on that from the fire department perspective?
So I think it would be part of your, when people apply for permits for building, it would be part of that process and part of the inspection process within, the plan that they present for the building. So a lot of the WUI code has to do with, are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, part of that code, most of the code has to do with construction materials, fire resistant materials, roof types, the type of roofs that are put onto buildings. So that would be part of the process of applying for a building code, the inspection process that our fire prevention division does, and you all that would grant a building permit. So it would not apply to existing structures as they are. It's my understanding that if somebody is going to do a significant remodel,
Sure.
then that portion of the remodel all of these codes would apply to that. But someone would have to pull a building permit in order to do that.
That's what I thought. Maybe you guys said that earlier, so pardon me if that's the case, but that's a big clarification to me anyway, so thank you.
How about if an existing residential structure wants to reduce their assessed fee by going out and doing interface control?
And I think that's what the state's plan is, and that's what they are encouraging, is if you are assessed a fee based on your risk number, that you have the ability to go through and follow the guidelines that they have put forth on how the types of things that you could do to reduce your risk. And you probably couldn't reduce it to a zero based on where you are and based on the types of materials around you, but you could certainly say, hey, we were at a 10, you assessed us the highest fee possible. Here's what we've done to reduce the risk. We've mitigated the fuels around our structure. We've done X, Y, and Z, and so we are submitting to you that we would like our fee reduced.
And that's where I see they then come back and intersect with the town's ordinances. And so I see kind of like two major, you have an individual resident that wants to reduce their fee and their risk, and they'll interact with our ordinances. And the second one is, a major development, proposed shrubs, condos, for example, will have that interaction as well. And so one of them, I think, will come to the planning commission, the larger project where we get to review development plans. The other one, I assume, is going to be handled at a staff level and mayor level based on what I read in the code, you can approve it. So I think, given that, I think there is probably some need for us to address our own ordinance. And I don't know, Paul, if you can maybe, can we adopt the WUI ordinance with the provision that we're gonna come back and modify it to blend it with the town's ordinances, or do we need to adjust the town's ordinances before we adopt the WUI code? Well, isn't the first step to designate what part of this town
is in the.
The boundary,
But that was.
Yeah, we would do that simultaneously with adopting the we could. But I am curious for Cameron's answer to the question of whether we need to amend our vegetation management ordinance simultaneously, or how we should think about the risk of, kicking it into 2026.
Yeah, so the recommendation that Polly and I have is to follow the mandate in state statute and implement the WUI code initially. At the time that we do that, we've identified some conflicts where there are some direct conflicts, and you've obviously identified some other scenarios here. We have to have the WUI code enacted by January 1st, or we run the risk of crossing the state. And so we recommend you do that. Whether or not you want to, at the same time, correct the town codes, you can. If you don't, then anything that's in conflict, the WUI code would supersede the existing town code. As far as amending the WUI code, there is no language in the state statute that requires us to enact that speaks to whether or not we can amend the WUI code. Polly and I have worked with other municipalities that had some pretty significant direct conflicts, like Brighton, with the code that you saw. And so as long as we are more restrictive and not less restrictive than the WUI code, then I think we can articulate that we're still in compliance.
so equal or more, okay.
But
Yeah.
Cameron, can I ask more? It seems like there are a number of ways a lawyer could spin the question of whether it's more restrictive, and our ordinance is restrictive insofar as it requires you to demonstrate extreme hardship to remove a tree, and then it requires you to essentially stuff saplings, seedlings and saplings onto your property, which in many cases, entails putting ladder fuels within a reasonably small perimeter around your house. So it's more restrictive. I don't know how to think about our regulation restricts vegetation management, and the WUI code requires vegetation removal to some extent. So I don't know in what direction can we be more restrictive if that's the state code we're trying to comply with.
Yeah, so the way I just, took the opportunity to drive up and stare out at the proposed Schwantz condo project before this meeting. And looked out at the line of aspens that the proposed new driveway is going to go with a bunch of mature trees. Look at all of the conifers that are going to be removed, and then if you read the Alta code, it's basically 10-to-1 of saplings and seedlings that have to go to replace each of those trees. And just a quick assessment there, that's hundreds of new trees that are going to be put onto that same acreage, which seems to be somewhat in conflict with the goals of this wildland urban interface.
Right. Yeah, so I just, it would seem to me that we're just, our requirement would essentially be nullified by the WUI code defensible space requirement. Do you agree, Cameron?
Not necessarily, because it depends on the specific section you're talking about. So taking the replacement provision in Alta code specifically, our replacement code doesn't say where those trees have to be placed, right? They have to be placed on the property. If that is in conflict with the WUI that requires 30 feet of defensible space, then those replacement trees can't be placed within that 30-foot defensible space zone. You can have existing vegetation within that 30 feet, but it has to have a separation from the structure, and it has to have separation between the crowns of trees. So there are some direct conflicts, but there's not a direct conflict in everything that prohibits all of town code. Ultimately, the town code is going to have to move to conform to the WUI code because it's mandated by the state. But the WUI doesn't specify locations and a lot of other areas that we have some latitude to work with.
I guess what I would say about whether we should amend this code section that I have on the screen right now. Now, or prior to adopting the WUI code or later, is that the wild and urban interface code will remain a fairly obscure piece of regulation that it's challenging enough to get developers or applicants to read the town code. And so I think if we were to have this regulation on the books as written, assuming that they're going to read the WUI code, would be, I mean, that's not a safe assumption, and I think it would be misleading, which can be problematic. So I'd like to see if we can find at least a stopgap amendment, since we're already going to have a public hearing here at the Planning Commission. Rather than necessarily having a second public hearing at some point in 2026 after we've done a more comprehensive project. I wonder if there's, again, at least some stopgap exception to for creating defensible space that we could put in here. That sounds like a reasonable objective over the next, let's say, 2 months.
Well, isn't the first step just to designate what part of the town is the wildland interface?
Well, it is, it's just that we only have so many opportunities to take action before the end of the year. And I think I think best for the town and anybody who has to comply with our regulations, if we could, again, at the same time that we adopt the WUI code, do an amendment to this.
Okay.
Because who knows when we're gonna get a more comprehensive scrub of, if that's why we're talking about the chicken and the egg at the moment.
Right, that's why I was asking that October deadline, because ideally, that's what you would want, is that detailed modeling that the state is gonna be doing to help identify real high risk areas. But since we're not gonna have that and the clock is ticking. It's only 2 months before the.
Chris, were you anticipating 2 actions, one for the boundary and then the other one for code, adoption of code?
I think it would, I think it's one agenda. I don't know how many resolutions or ordinances it would be, but I think it's one public hearing and one planning commission meeting, and then a town meeting. So that is, our planning commission meetings are at the end of the month. Or they're, at any rate, they're later in the month than the council meetings. So for instance, we don't want December planning commission meeting.
What I'm getting at is the boundary that's not gonna impact code so much. It's or impact the adoption. Maybe I'm misreading this. I see it as almost 2 actions. There's no reason we couldn't do the boundary today if we wanted to, and then do.
Well, it's not on the agenda. It's not on the
That's true.
agenda.
Okay, yeah, okay. Well,
What would be the reason not to look at the town boundary? I mean, what was talked about before. What's the issue with saying the municipal boundary is the boundary?
Yeah.
that's what
Well,
we're
I think-
proposing is the.
And this is maybe I think too much about Alta, so this doesn't occur to everybody, but Alta's distinct from Brighton. It's very distinct from Immigration Canyon. It's distinct from Jasper, and it's distinct from that community in Boulder County, Colorado. I mean, they're not bare, but we've got south facing slopes that are by and large not densely forested. We've got ski runs. And then we've got this corridor through the center of town with our biggest buildings have almost no vegetation around them. So it's occurred to me, again, from a layman's perspective, that we may have less exposure down here in town, but in speaking with Jay and Chief Dern at UFA, it's not necessarily relevant of concrete, that the gold miners is currently built out of concrete and has no vegetation on the site. Anything can be there in the future, including vegetation. And it's not necessarily about what's going on a specific site, it's about timber casting and all other more complex things that are beyond my perspective a little bit. So there's really, I don't think there's a concrete reason not to adopt the town boundary, and I don't think there's data to support doing anything besides that.
I don't either.
I would, if I could just ask a question, then Cameron, I don't know what kind of conversation you guys had with, I think Immigration Canyon met last night, and Brighton has already voted to include their entire municipality. Did they have similar concerns, or what was their decision-making process that led them to include their entire boundary?
Yeah, I wasn't there for the discussions for Brighton. Polly handled those. I was there for Immigration Canyon, and they had a couple of council members and myself actually just look through all of the parcels that had commercial or residential property on it, and any subdivisions and all that. And we literally couldn't find a place that did not adjoin a pretty significant amount of vegetation that met the definition. So I want to just clarify a couple of things. The definition of what we are applying and designating as a wildland urban interface is in the WUI code. So we're required to use the definition in the code to apply it to a property and determine whether or not it is in there. There's not a lot of discretion for us to say, well, this property doesn't fit because we don't think so. We have to say it doesn't fit because it doesn't match the definition, and we have to articulate why. So some of the other municipalities like Salt Lake City literally has a map that shows every property along the foothills, along a gully, or a ravine, and they've designated specific individual parcels that circle or border those areas. Immigration in Brighton, just because of the nature of the development and the nature of the community, there really weren't any. And so the easier option for them was just to designate the entire town. That's what we had initially discussed for Alta, but that's, obviously why we're here having the discussion, because you're not the same as Brighton. You're not the same as Immigration. You're definitely not, thank goodness, the same as Salt Lake City. One other thing, if I could just mention, the code requires us to designate this map in partnership with the Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and we're waiting on that portion of it. So if there are some concerns, we could actually just pass the buck back to the state and say, well, we're going to designate the properties as listed in the URAP map. And then as that becomes updated, that becomes our map, if that's what you want to do.
This I just went back to this slide. If you can see you're not able to see my cursor yet. But I think many of us can probably recognize some landmarks, some Alta landmarks here on the screen. The cursor and the circle are on the town office. I think the Hellgate Cliffs are over here to the west of that. And then, these are the south facing slopes. They might not have that many stands of forest on them, but they're all high risk. And I think, we're up into Devil's Castle and Sugarloaf Peak here. And then we get to the Peruvian Ridge here, where you see some very high risk on the sort of forested west side of P Ridge there at Snowbird. So you can see that under the current version of this risk assessment tool, virtually all of Alta is in the high risk wildland urban interface. When you zoom in, you can see that the parking lots do pretty well. Summer Road doesn't seem to have any risk designation. And then there are some flecks of yellow and green, but by and large, the entire 4 square miles or so within the town boundary is designated high risk.
I would just add that the areas that are not high risk are not areas that you would be able to build anyway.
Yeah. Fair enough.
How much of a change is this anyway? If we meet these new state requirements?
It's a pretty,
Well. Yeah.
for other municipalities, it's been a pretty big change.
In what way?
Well, in the building materials that are required, in the design requirements, in the defensible space, the area that you have to clear, the limits of disturbance, landscaping plans, they're like, when it's not a small thing. There's going to be some adjusting to it for sure.
And what are the conflicts that you referred to earlier, Cameron?
So we've had some conflicts with the illumination of addresses on homes in some mountainous municipalities, just because the driveways were so long that if you put the listing of the address as it's required in the WUI code, it wouldn't have actually any correlation to the building itself. We've had conflicts with vegetation similar to Alta's on the removal of vegetation. We've had other conflicts with building materials. In one municipality, the council, excuse me, felt like the fire resistant building materials, as far as the roof and the siding and things go, were unattractive, and so they didn't want to implement those. And so it definitely requires a change and some adjustment.
And how about existing projects which aren't completed? Are they going to be affected by this?
No, so if they have a permit, then the codes that existed at the time the permit was acquired are the standards that are vested with that project. It has caused a conflict with a couple of municipalities where a building project went on for 4 or 5 years. One, in fact, is 9 years, and when the permit lapses, then they lose that vesting of the code, and when they renew or get a new permit, it's going to be under the new standards, and that can be pretty fatal or difficult to a project for sure. But it's not retroactive.
And what are the consequences if we do nothing?
The consequences there is if there's a wildfire and it ends up within the boundaries of Alta, we would not receive any state or federal funding for the fighting of that forest fire.
Now, there was a fire a couple years ago at Sugar Plum, and I think there was one at Hellgate. Have we had other fires?
Structure fires or wildland fires?
Structure.
So two at Sugar Plum and one at Hellgate, but that's the recent, well, I say recent, so that's probably in the last 20 years. Those are the significant fires that we've had in Little Cottonwood Canyon. And all three of those were wintertime fires.
Well, I guess one of the problems is if we don't do anything, it's going to have a bad influence. I know the Blackjack, where my place is, we had difficulty getting insurance this last go around, and our HOA fees went up by 50% as a result of the increase in premiums.
I would think there'd be some risk to the town too, in terms of,
That's why I
That's
wouldn't.
kind of we have to do it, yeah.
I don't know why we would change the boundary with that in mind. I think the original, like if we talk about the planting ordinance, that was a different time, and that one goes way back. I remember I had a blue covered paper from, late 90s or something, and that tree planting ordinance was there. I think politically, I don't know what we call it these days, but the environment is different. The risk is there. Peruvian Ridge was on fire. I think that was last year or the year before. It was a lightning strike, and I was just walking the dog and smoke was pouring down the hill, so I think I think you correctly did a nice job with the package, Chris, and correctly identified that there was a conception when I moved here that it's way too wet here to burn. And I think that has been proven incorrect.
I think I'll be trying to be careful here, but I think we were getting that input directly from people in positions of authority over the topic. That's
Time has
over a decade ago, but yeah, but times changed for sure. There was, of course, that fire. Was that last summer in Mayberg Gulch? Remember that?
I don't recall fire neighbor.
We were talking to Adam Shaw about it.
Yeah, I thought it was further north, but maybe not.
Was it this summer or last summer?
There's something this summer, but I can't remember the details.
I remember a fire in a west facing slope on Hanging Valley pour overs. And I remember.
Yes, and it was a place where it took. You had to hike 4 hours to get to it, and they decided that it didn't. Nobody was gonna go in there.
I remember driving down and being like, oh, where am I gonna see it? Am I gonna see it? And then there were a bunch of cars. And at the gate buttress, pull out, and then in my rear view, I was like, oh, there's a fire. You could really see it. So it was not it was a small fire in the standards, but it was not a major wildfire and went out. So
I think it's been UFA's recommendation that you include your entire municipal boundary, and I'm not just saying that because that's the easy thing to do. But I think maybe Cameron, with what he was saying as well, is if you do not do that and you say this area is included and this area is not, you need to be able to defend that. And I think you are able to defend the move of saying the entire boundary is included in your WUI ordinance.
And I think if a fire starts in the unincluded area, then that brings all the risk right back to the town of Alta.
I wanna say, go ahead, Paul, sorry.
How will the properties up in the basin be affected by this, if at all?
Well, I'll make the comment that I was gonna make to start, which is to say that, the WUI code is not just defensible space, and a couple of you have touched on some of the other provisions in the WUI code, and as Cameron said, this is potentially a pretty big change. Our building envelope regulations are not super detailed. And a big component of the WUI code is construction materials and techniques, just for instance. And then of course there are these access and water supply provisions. One benefit to the Albion Basin properties is this defensible space provision. Our regulation is quite strict, but I know that folks have been doing defensible space work and particularly have been fairly well organized up in the basin. UFA offers a chipper day event annually where they bring a crew and a chipper up, and you kind of stack fuels in a certain way. They come up and turn it into mulch to put it on the ground. And so, I have not completely wrapped my head around what sort of non-compliance issues the other provisions here might create for certain properties, other than the ones where I know they have like shingle flips and so I assume that some of those properties in the basin, all of which are almost 50 years old at the newest, and many of which are difficult to access year round, but especially in the winter. So I just haven't thought through that. But again, it's not something we're gonna be going out and enforcing retroactively. It's just a matter of when you want to make a change. And that change would presumably include some kind of, vegetation work, but we wanna clarify the conflicts, especially with the vegetation work to the people. Make it easier for people to do that. So,
as I mentioned the last meeting, I see a lot of potential conflict in existing water supply contracts with some of the requirements, I think in section 4 of the WUI code. Because they're very limited. What they can do under those contracts.
Right, and so that's just one example of a way that the WUI code might restrict development in places that haven't already, like on unbuilt lots. It might add kind of a what's the metaphor? It just might add a layer to that, layer cake of regulations that apply to development up here.
Okay, Chris, let's work backwards. I personally think we need to get things rectified and adopted by the end of the year per code or per statute. We kind of made plans for our December meeting already. It doesn't mean we couldn't take some action though. And we need to have a public hearing for adoption, whatever that may look. What do you recommend for October and November then?
Well, I've been thinking that we would have a public hearing in October and presumably vote to make a recommendation so that the council has an extra. I think we ought to try to take action next month because the council may need another month to talk through this. I can't imagine they need another month if all we're gonna do is, adopt the WUI code and the boundary. But depending on how deep we might try to go on vegetation management, it might take them more than a month. It might also not.
Right.
But it would be
No,
nice to give us a month. Yeah, in
Yeah,
which
last
case we
month we
would.
talked about trying to get this done in 2 meetings. I think we should still strive for that if everybody's open to that, because you're right, we do need to let the council, be fair to them, let them mull on it before the end of the year.
Is there a scenario where we don't try to amend all the bar ordinance, but we say at the bottom of all the restrictions about planting or building materials subject to, what we cut or whatever?
I would put that one to Cameron. Does that question make sense, Cameron? I think can we create a blanket exception or exceptions for
Programmatic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the sort of very rough unofficial edits to the Alta code, I just simply inserted a language that said that the vegetation preservation codes are exempt or disallowed when prohibited under WUI. And so you can sort of point everyone in our existing code to WUI and say, look, this is what controls in the meanwhile, and or vice versa, right? Either way, you can do that.
It's close to what Dave was saying. Okay.
The Brighton ordinance, as I said, is sophisticated, so I think it would be a leap to assume we're going to adopt the whole thing. And it's not going to be quite as simple as just adopting this section. This section relies, for instance, on the definition of limits of disturbance. I honestly don't know if we have one of those, but there's just some kind of compatibilities we have to evaluate to adopt something like this. So I'm sure we can come up with a narrow way, a narrowest possible way to reduce the conflict between that town of Alta code section and the WUI code. And there's all manner of ways we could, be more broad about it. But
if the commission can give some direction on, broad sort of policy that you want to maintain in Alta's code, we can certainly propose language between now and the next meeting, and then actually, revise or alter that language at the next meeting to fit the timeline. I will also point out that the likelihood of a wildland fire in Alta in January is probably pretty low. So while that is a hard deadline, I don't know that we're overly concerned about missing out on funding for a wildland fire in January. I think it's certainly still a nice goal, but if we need an extra month or two, I don't think that's going to make or break things.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. And I think it'd be helpful for me to hear what the public has to say and think about this. But I think we ought to look at everything and address it comprehensively.
Well, I think it's, if we're gonna do a complete rewrite of the vegetation preservation section of our ordinance, I think that's a big lift. So I guess I lean more towards the adopt the WUI code, the WUI boundary with the provision that conflicts, are resolved in the WUI's favor, and then set ourselves a goal to rewrite our vegetation management. Where we can go through and get, a lot more public input and study it more carefully than trying to rush it through here in one meeting.
Yeah.
So you're saying adopt things as is, and obviously the WUI code would trump our existing code for now until then we go back later and adopt our code to be dovetail more closely with WUI, with public input, et cetera, over the course of the winter. Is that?
That would be my recommendation, yes.
I think that's very sensible.
I think I'm hearing we're kind of converging to an approach here. I'm good with that. That makes sense. Let's meet. We can do two things at once. We can meet the statute deadline yet also, and also in the very near future after that, adopt just code. So I'm good with that approach.
Great.
What's everybody think? We're ready to take notice of public hearing and agenda action item, potential action item in the October meeting? We good with that?
Yes.
Sounds like it.
That
Okay,
works for me.
all right. Chris, Cameron, do you guys have everything you need?
Yes, I think we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We go back to our agenda. I think that's probably it, right? Any new business? All right, our next meeting is in October,
22nd.
22nd.
22nd, thank you. Yeah. So I think we'll do that, should be nice, hopefully good weather, and we'll all be there in person, I hope. And, I think that's it.
Can I make a quick comment on meeting schedules, John?
Yes, you may.
So, I guess one thing I want to say is thank you to the commission for being so available over the last year, maybe year plus. I think this is the busiest calendar year planning commission meetings we've had since pre-pandemic. Maybe there was a flurry of meetings when we adopted the Albion Basin Protection Overlay Zone and that whole package of stuff around 2020 or 2021, but we've had more meetings. We've had more months of meetings than not in January, and that's been a departure from just at least the last couple of years. So thank you all for your commitment to this. I'll just point out that we adopted the meeting schedule at the beginning of 2025. We moved the November and December meetings to the third Wednesday. Because of the holidays that always fall on the fourth weeks of those months. We do the same thing in July up, and we did this year anyways. So just for your planning purposes, we do have at least calendar placeholders, and I think we have often enjoyed not meeting in November and December. But of course, if somebody comes with an application that the planning commission has jurisdiction over, we have to convene and take action. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, so
Thanks.
okay, all right, good enough. Yeah, 19th and 17th is what we have right now for November, December, and
19th of November.
yeah, 19th and the 17th of December. And 17th is when we were gonna do our walk, ski about, what have you.
Right. See.
Good, all right, just a quick note, several of us are going to the League of Cities and Towns Conference next week. I see there is a resort community breakout group. I know I'll be going to that, so if anything of note that's comes up from that conference next week, we'll certainly report back in November, in October. Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn our meeting, and thanks again.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Dave seconded.
All right, thank you. I didn't hear that. Thank you. Okay, all those in favor, thumbs up and or aye.
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 Very good. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month, if not before.
Thank you.
Now,
All right,
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Aaron. Paul.